Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Rubenstein. This is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. It's February 19th, 2025. We are still in phase one of Israel's hostage ransom payment to Hamas. Hamas has announced that all 6 of the remaining living hostages who were slated to be released in phase one of the hostage ransom deal will be released on Saturday. 2 of these living hostages have been held in Gaza for 10 years. One of them is Avera Mengistu. He suffers from mental illness. He crossed into Gaza from Israel in 2014, was captured by Hamas and held ever since. The other hostage who has been in Gaza for a decade is Hisham al-Sayed. He is Muslim. Of course, being Muslim didn't protect him because he is also Israeli. He suffers from mental illness. He entered Gaza from Israel in 2015, and Hamas has been holding him ever since. 3 of the living hostages who will be released on Saturday were taken from the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. They are Elia Cohen, Omer Wankert, and Omer Shemtov. The last hostage that is supposed to be released on Saturday is Tal Shoam. Tal Shoam was kidnapped on October 7th from Kibbutz Be'eri after he fled his house, which Hamas terrorists had set on fire. We do not know much about the condition of any of these hostages. Hamas also announced that tomorrow it would release 4 dead bodies of Israelis who were taken hostage on October 7th. The announcement came from senior Hamas terrorist Khalil El-Haya, who I believe is living comfortably in Doha, Qatar. El-Haya said that 3 members of the Bibas family would be among the bodies released. Shiri Bibas and her 2 young boys, Ariel and Kfir. The Bibas family is awaiting official confirmation from the Israeli government before commenting further. The announcement about the fate of Shiri, Kfir, and Ariel Bibas sparked a wave of anger against the Hamas terrorist army that took the Bibas family hostage. This anger has been valid every day since October 7th, 2023. Here's something that would be true even if Hamas had not taken a single hostage on October 7th. And it's true even if every hostage is returned alive today. Hamas must be removed from power in Gaza. Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza. Hamas cannot have a military in Gaza walking distance from Israeli homes. Right now, Hamas is the government of Gaza. Hamas was the government of Gaza on October 7th. The Hamas government of Gaza ordered the October 7th massacre. Hamas gunned down hundreds of people at a music festival. It burned families in their homes. It fired RPGs into cars. Hamas terrorists live streamed their crimes from their victims' phones because they wanted us to see and be afraid. Hamas promises to carry out more October 7th style massacres until Israel is destroyed. Hamas is the enemy of humanity, and it must be destroyed. Israelis are not going to live walking distance from a terrorist army that wants to kill them all. Would you? Let's take some questions from people who are watching live on our social media platforms, whether on Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, please.
Thank you, Daniel. Our first question comes from YouTube. Akshay asks, will there be any action against the UN for allowing Hamas to use their facilities and build tunnels underneath them?
It seems like the answer is no. Specifically, we're not just talking about the UN, we're talking about the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, which is the largest employer in Gaza. Its employees are almost all local Palestinians, and its employees who are local Palestinians have been living in a territory that's been governed by Hamas since 2007. So it's safe to say that Hamas has completely infiltrated UNRWA, that Hamas makes sure that family members of Hamas terrorists get the UNRWA jobs. We know that Hamas did nothing. We know that UNRWA did nothing as Hamas built a tunnel underneath UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza City. It's crazy. Hamas had a server farm under UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza City, and it used electricity for all the computers. It got that electricity from above ground where UNRWA headquarters was. And UNRWA just doesn't seem to be too upset at this, which is why that Israel is taking steps to ban Israeli officials, the Israeli government, from cooperating with UNRWA. It's time that UNRWA be shut down. It's not taking accountability. It doesn't care about accountability. It's not interested in vetting its employees. That's why it needs to go.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Laura on Instagram. How do we destroy Hamas when they are embedded in civilians and that we ensure we still get the remaining hostages back?
The two goals of the war are the destruction of Hamas's military and government capabilities and the safe return of every hostage. Nobody has an answer about how it's possible to do both. This is the subject of intense diplomacy right now with the Trump administration and Israel and Egypt and Jordan and the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The reason that Hamas took hostages is so that it could exchange them for guarantees that Hamas would survive the war. Like, Hamas took hostages so that it could not be destroyed. That's the challenge of this war. That's why we're 16 months into this war, doing everything we can to get the hostages home while making sure that Hamas will not be in power to take more hostages in the future. It's going to require not just a military strategy, but also a diplomatic one that can see some type of off-ramp for those in Hamas who wish to surrender, and for those who don't, there may be the military option resuming, because there's no solution, because Hamas says we want Israel to be destroyed. Israel doesn't want to be destroyed. I'm open to suggestions, but this is the challenge that we face.
Thank you. Our next question comes from our Instagram stories. What will it take to get phase 2 of the hostage ransom deal?
Another very important question. What will it take to get to phase 2? First of all, what are the phases? Phase 1 was supposed to see the release of 33 Israeli hostages. This is what we've been calling the humanitarian cases, even though all of them are humanitarian cases. The first 33 were civilians mostly, and also the female Israeli soldiers. Phase 2 is supposed to see the release of all the remaining Israeli hostages. This includes the male Israeli soldiers, in exchange for the release of massive numbers of Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prison and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. So in exchange for withdrawal, Israel gets the hostages. What's the problem with that is that Hamas will remain in power in Gaza. That is an unacceptable end to the war as far as Israel is concerned. So that is why there is intense diplomatic negotiations going on right now to come up with a solution and a vision for how Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza, because if Hamas is going to be the government of Gaza, I cannot see Israel agreeing to end the war, because Hamas's whole purpose is war until Israel is destroyed.
Thank you. Our next question comes from X. We're hearing last night that the IDF struck weapons in Syria. What's the situation there?
We can't forget that the October 7th war is not just a war between Gaza and Israel. It is a war against the Iranian regime and its proxy armies on 7 different fronts: Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, militias in Iraq, Yemen, and the Iranian regime itself. What's going on in Syria should be receiving a lot more attention, but there's so much else going on that it falls out of the news. Bashar al-Assad lost power a couple of months ago, and what's going to be his replacement is a guy named al-Jolani. We're not totally sure what his vision is for living in peace with Israel, and we're not going to wait to find out what he's going to do with all of the weapons that the former regime left behind. So Israel is removing the weapon stockpiles of the previous regime so that they don't fall into the hands of people who are not committed, not just to peace, which of course would be lovely, but even to the separation of forces agreement from 40 years ago that ended the Yom Kippur War. There's a lot of uncertainty in Syria. We do not want the dangerous weapons to fall into the hands of people who may promise to cause us harm. So we've seen Israel has taken a number of steps since the fall of the Assad regime, destroying chemical weapon stockpiles, other heavy weapons, and I expect this continue until we get a better picture of what's going on in Syria and what relations the new government of Syria wants to have with Israel.
Thank you. Our next question comes also from X. Is Egypt violating its peace treaty with Israel by mobilizing in the Sinai?
According to Israel's ambassador in the United States, the answer is yes, that Egypt is violating the peace treaty from 1979 by mobilizing its forces in Sinai in numbers that are much greater than the peace treaty allows. This is the subject of intense diplomacy right now between Israel and Egypt and the United States. Egypt has also been saying that Israel's presence in Gaza along the Gaza-Egypt border, the Philadelphia corridor, is a violation of the peace treaty. That's something that the two sides are going to have to negotiate, but in the meantime, it's concerning to see tensions rise between Israel and Egypt. Both of them have a peace treaty. We don't want to see further tension. We want to see this partnership be a partnership of solutions, and we're looking at Gaza to find out what can Egypt do that it has not been doing in previous years to prevent Hamas from rearming or to prevent anyone in Gaza from acquiring heavy weaponry and mobilizing against Israel. Egypt is going to be a critical partner in achieving any objective that allows us to get into phase 2, that allows us to see the safe return of the hostages. We need the partnership of Egypt, and it may be that Egypt wants to send a message to the rest of us that it is needed in this regard, and we should not ignore it.
Thank you. This is our final question. Rose on Instagram asked a great question. How do we improve Israeli Hasbara?
That's the $1 million question, and if I was able to answer it, I think I would have $1 million. But what we're trying to do here is to demonstrate how things should be done by speaking clearly, confidently, with the facts, and without any sense of shame in what we are standing for. That everyone needs to understand what we are fighting for. We are fighting to live safely in our own homes, and we're fighting a vicious terrorist army, Hamas, that wants to see us destroyed. As far as I'm concerned, the rest is commentary. But as far as what can be done, tell people to come to Israel. The best way to understand Israel is to see it for yourself. And the more you can learn, the better you will be. To read as much as you can, because the smarter you are, the more you'll be able to talk to others. And a final tip for having conversations about Israel is, instead of trying to give as much information as possible, try asking questions of the person you're talking to so that you can understand where they're coming from, what their concerns are, before you come in with hard facts and truth. It's important to know who you're talking to and maybe where your points of disagreement will be. I hope that was slightly helpful. I want to thank everyone for listening to the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We'll post this online later on our audio platforms. You can find the live will be on YouTube. You can listen to it then. Thank you all for listening. I'm Daniel Rubenstein. Have a lovely day.